All right, this is the last LangCamp Hangout of 2015, and we are talking about our Lang book. We're talking about Make It Stick today. True confessions, I did not finish reading the whole book, but Chris Clymer did, and I think Sarah Bolaños did. Yeah, so
Yes.
we have experts to guide us through.
Uh,
Um, we're we're going to call you an expert. It's a LangCamp term that means whatever we want it to mean. So. Um, So we're going to talk about some ideas from the book and what we got out of it and how we can use it in our classrooms. So I'm Laura Sexton. I'm at PBL and the TL. I teach Spanish, mostly 1 and 2. And here are some amigos. Let's start with Sarah. Would you introduce yourself, please? You're muted.
There we go. I was trying to find the blog post. I'm Sarah Bolaños. I teach Spanish in Maine. I'm currently in Costa Rica, so the Wi-Fi may not be the best.
It'll be fun. All right. And Chris, would you introduce yourself?
sure. I'm Chris Clymer. I teach French in Nashville, Tennessee.
All right. So we have 2 languages represented and mostly just East Coast, although other countries at the moment. All right. So the book is Make It Stick with Senor Brown and a few other people. And basically it's about how we can get learning to actually stay and not just go in one ear and out the other, I guess. So what I wanted to start off with first was what were some things that surprised you guys from the book? For me personally, I thought that flashcards would not be something that a Make It Stick thing would advocate. That it surprised me that flashcards count as retrieval, but then I guess it makes sense because there's information and you have to recall something that's not there, and that was one of the big themes was having gaps in information, forgetting a little bit, and then quizzing yourself to get the information back. So it made sense in the context of the book, but I never thought that would be one of the suggested strategies. What about you guys?
Yeah, I haven't assigned flashcards in a few years, so I was kind of surprised to see that. It kind of made me feel like I might go backwards if I start assigning flashcards again, but the students need to know the vocabulary in order to be proficient. So, I mean, they got to learn it, I guess, somehow, but it still kind of threw me for a loop that was one of the things that was mentioned.
I wonder too if the flashcards for us might not be so much English Spanish or English French or as picture target
Right.
language or question answer. So like it's like building the conversation rather than and having something contextual rather than just word 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 word, because I didn't get the impression that that's the kind of things we're talking about. I got the impression that it was like what is a cell wall kind of thing, and then they had a definition with it, not just equal parts. I don't know.
Right. I think they were, it's the retrieval practice. So a flashcard means that whether you're talking about an image or L1 to L2, you're forcing your brain to try to come up with it before you flip it over. Whereas some students would stare at the picture with the word underneath it, and that's not retrieval. That's just the mass practice. And that was one of the things, I think the biggest surprising thing for me, and maybe reaffirming, because I think we all know this, a lot of the things that kids do, their favorite strategies, are not helping. I mean, how many times do we have a kid that will come and say, I spent 2 hours on this, but still not have good results? And so the logical conclusion is, well, the things that we were doing weren't the best things for retention.
Right. The mass practice was kind of a surprise too, like because in the book they talked about how mass practice feels good, and the kids feel like they're learning, but it's not going to stick. And
Right.
I when I give them Sexton's strategies for retention, like they always want to say, repeating the words, is that one of the things? It's like, no, that'll get it in your short term. So in that sense, it was also a little bit of a affirmation what I had
Right.
thought before. Did you guys have any other surprises as you were reading, or did the rest of it kind of go, yeah, I thought.
Yeah, there were a lot of affirmations. That was one of them. The notion that effortful work leads to better long-term retention. I think that's something that teachers always, we use that term. If students are working at it, it's probably going to stick with them more. And so that was really affirming to read in the book.
Yeah, I thought a lot of it made sense. It's just, for me, I think it's hard to remember to go back and go over the stuff again. Like, you feel like we did this for 2 weeks or whatever, or the vocabulary or the conversation skills for this particular unit, but then you kind of wait a week and then you go back and do it again. Like, it makes sense. It just, I think I'm going to need to plan a lot better to do this if I want to. I need to plan a lot better, period, but...
Don't we all, sister? So, like, you talk about the space learning and the interleaving, is that what they called it?
Yeah.
Was there a difference between interleaving and space learning? And I just didn't get that far.
Well, the way I understood it, interleaving means try to retrieve something else in lieu of, and space practice just you wouldn't necessarily be trying to retrieve something else. So I took that. In fact, one of the things I thought about doing this year was to tell my students, or maybe just do some action research, try to split their French homework in half and have one group, my test group, do half of it and then do like biology homework and then come back and do the second half of their French homework. And my control group to do what I'm assuming all kids do, which is knock out their French homework and then knock out their biology homework. I'm wondering if the interleaving, which would be space practice, but it would also be interleaving because it would force them to look, to think and try to retrieve social studies or English, write an English paper, and then come back. So I'm thinking that might mean the French sticks better.
Okay, so the space practice is about the timing.
Right.
And then the interleaving is sticking something else in space.
Right. That's what I took it to mean.
Makes sense to me. I had noticed that they didn't ever define interleaving. It's like, you guys are doing to us what you tell us they got to do, like struggle with the problem. And I noticed they did that a lot, and there was a lot of returning to things throughout the book. It was like, right. You're spacing my practice. I know what you're doing. Yeah. So that was intriguing.
I like the example about, because I'm a softball coach as well, about batters hitting curveball, 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 which is not nearly as good, the mass practice, as hitting a curveball and not knowing that the next one is going to be a fastball or a slider or a changeup. And so students prefer doing all their French homework at once and knocking it out. But probably better for long-term being a good hitter is to not know what pitch is coming and to force yourself to be able to hit pitches. And then being able to hit, I mean, that really resonated with me because I saw the connections, and that example made a lot of sense.
That made me think of the thinking of ACTFL when you went to an OWL language, the Organic World Language training, and they were in the circles and they were asking questions, and they start with a me gusta, te gusta, me gusta, te gusta. Then they go to eres or something like that, and they say are you this? Yes, you're that. Is he that? And then they come back to the me gusta and te gusta, and I guess I'm not sure if that's what circling is. I'm not fluent enough in that, TPRS strategies, TCI strategies, but it reminded me of that because that way the kids have to listen to the question and not just say I like over and over, and that's how a real conversation goes. And that's why it hurt my brain so much the first time I went to Mexico, because I didn't know what to expect and I wasn't prepared to say anything not anticipated, So yeah. And any other affirmations in what you saw? What about the emphasis on quizzing and testing?
I liked that. I mean, that was one of the surprises, because, we talk about, in fact, this year, I've been thinking about getting away this past year, getting away from all of those little quizzes and having those be in the grade book, because that was sort of conventional wisdom. So I was thinking, well, if I'm really assessing proficiency, there ought to be a lot of low stakes formative assessments and then just assess at the end. But the book seemed to suggest that trying to retrieve it, so that daily quiz, that daily, all right, what can you do? So maybe rather than going over homework as the way of testing their knowledge, maybe a performance where they don't look at their homework, they don't look at the work they did the night before.
Yeah, I liked that idea too. Um, like I said in my blog post, we could do that instead of, or have the repasito or the caliente la mente, the warm up, as more of like a quiz where they're not looking at anything and they're not talking and they're not like collaborating as much, just to see how much that they know. In the As I was reading, I was trying to figure out how it would fit better with the proficiency stuff, and I think that if we try to get them to be making more complete sentences instead of just like fill in the blank or circle, even though they did mention fill in the blank a lot, I like trying to push them a little bit harder to make the sentences. I think that's more useful for them, even if it's just short.
Well, and not necessarily just sentences, but like conversation, like a back and forth kind of thing. And it was interesting to point out that while they emphasized the testing and the quizzing, they said not multiple choice. They said they had to produce something.
Right.
And I think if we're focused on assessments, and they focus on assessments that were in context, that were real world, like when they're talking about flying the plane, not just like knowing what each button does, but like actually being in a situation. And so like the tests weren't tests in the sense that we've come to know them, and you know that teachers have been fighting against in the last.
They were tasks.
They were tasks. Yeah, they were contextual tasks. So calling it quizzing is just to get at the retrieval thing. But really, I mean, if we're sitting there saying "Cómo estás?", you know, that's more of a quiz than just like read me what you wrote on your homework, like you said. And I noticed Douglas has joined us. Douglas, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Doug Kraus. Can you hear me okay? Am I coming through? Okay. Doug Kraus, I teach French at Sparta Middle School in New Jersey. And I about at the middle of the year, discovered audiobooks, and I've been listening to a lot of audiobooks on the way to work and back. And so Make It Stick is one of those books I've been listening to. It's really fascinating stuff. And I'm listening to that as I read. You all may be familiar with a couple other books about learning. One is, I think it's called How We Learn, Benedict Carey. Very related. He's talking about a lot of the same things that the Make It Stick authors are. And a couple of other books that deal kind of on a more superficial level with areas of learning. But I'm really finding this fascinating, and I'm sure, like all of you, am specifically curious about how to apply this to languages, how we can make some of this research work for our students. I think I was kind of in and out at the beginning, so I didn't hear everything you talked about. I think one of the big, and you asked about affirmations, Laura. I think one of the big affirmations for me is that this seems to really support our use of authentic resources and authentic texts. One of the ideas the authors explore, and that they see this evidence in research for, is generation, where you are given a problem, you're not given the solution, you're just given a problem, something to sort through, and it is up to you as the learner to try to figure out what that solution might be on your own without really being given all of the puzzle pieces. And I think that's what's happening when a student engages with an authentic text for the first time. There's some things that you recognize, but most of it or some of it is not going to be comprehensible to you. And I think if what we're trying to do there is present a puzzle that needs to be figured out by the student, that it seems that generation, this idea of generation, is exactly that we can ask our students, and now we can, when we present that text, we have a bit more justification, a bit more rationale for doing so. You know, this is going to help your learning by guessing at the meanings of these words and phrases. I don't know if you guys got that too.
Yeah, no, and they pointed out, provided that we come in with feedback to help, we let them struggle with it at the beginning. Yeah, that's a really good point. Let them struggle with it at the beginning, and then be there to catch them in the big gaps.
Mm-hmm.
That part reminded me of two things: the desirable struggle versus the undesirable struggle. And it reminded me of a lesson that Amy Leonard did with travel things and travel documents and trying to get students to plan how to get somewhere, I think it was. And they had the problem posed, and then they had to figure out from the authentic text how to solve it using what they knew and what they didn't know. It also reminded me of a presentation at the North Carolina at Flank, where Al Irwin was saying, it took me so long to realize that I needed I plus 1, not I plus 150.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because they talked about desirable amount of struggle versus the undesirable, and there was a time that I would just be like, here, it's authentic, so it's good, and you will love it, and you will do something real, and they're just like, ouch, it hurts.
Yeah, I'm guilty of that. I mean, and I've been a long convert to natural sort of immersive approach, and really equating L1 acquisition with L2 acquisition, and I'm still guilty of that. But I think that's one of the things the Make It Stick book affirmed for me, and I could be misreading it, is that struggle, when you don't know what the person is saying to you, provided that you can stick with them on behalf of the learner and walk them, hold their hand through that struggle. Maybe I plus 4 for certain learners is appropriate, provided they trust that you will get them to the plus 4 level. So.
Right. And it really made me rethink, like, one of the struggles that I had with my own class with the listening, because it was a huge issue that, like, my kids were like, oh, we're feeling intermediate, and like their IPAs were showing them intermediate and everything but listening, and I was giving them authentic listening when maybe I shouldn't have, because it was producing the undesirable struggle. Like, they had to struggle to do it, but they didn't have the foothold, and that's one of the things that they talk about, is that the kids have to, like, they didn't quite say outright that they had to feel confident, but that was what I got from it. Is that how you guys interpret it as well?
I'm going to get earphones so that you don't get feedback from me.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with you, Laura. I think that's what they're trying to explain in terms of, there's a very fine line, though, I think, between desirable and undesirable difficulties. And I think part of setting students' minds at ease is just being very transparent about what we're trying to do, and that sometimes we're going to fall short or exceed that line, and that the students just kind of have to hold on for the ride a little bit at those times when we don't nail it quite right. That's I think one of the toughest things, is finding those texts, finding those authentic texts, whether they're written or spoken, that will be that perfect I plus 1, or that it would reach them right where they are. I think that's one of the most difficult tasks we face.
I think you can still use the authentic text. I don't think having unauthentic text, if that what you would call it, I think maybe I think the kids are feeling like they need to be perfect at it. My students freak out every time we listen to something, or every time we watch a video, like, oh my God, it's too fast, I can't do it. But I'm like, we're going to listen to it 5 times if you need to. I'm not going to push the turtle button and slow it down for you, but you're going to need to, like, I'm not asking you to do anything with this that I don't think you can do. I'm not asking them to analyze it or whatever. I'm trying to, do you hear this word? Circle it, yes or no. Just things like that. I think that they just get too wrapped up in being wrong and being afraid to make mistakes. Even if it's something that's not going to be graded, they still want to be right all the time.
And that reminded me of, what did I say, chapter 6, where they were talking about the guy who became like a stock market genius or something, and he first, like, he magically turned buying land into a house, and he turned that into 4 apartments, and then, like, he just couldn't do anything with the apartments and lost a lot of money. And so like, the emphasis there was the rule building, like, what do they need to do in those situations. So even if we do, like, overshoot the I plus 1, we could say, okay, in this situation, what is the rule to get back to where you can struggle and survive, to where, so, like, where when the guy just, like, abandoned his 4 apartments that he was trying to be a landlord for while he's in college, that, like, that could be like what our students might need to abandon a certain video or something, but what do they take from that about how they can respond to something that they don't understand? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
that's key. Sure, they've got to be using all the tools that they have at their disposal for expressing that confusion. They have to understand from day one that that's one of the primary, especially at the novice level, that you're expressing that confusion and letting us know and letting everyone know in the classroom that that's a point of confusion that needs to be cleared up.
Yeah, and that kind of comes back to the whole circumlocution thing. Like, if you're in a conversation where you don't know what the heck the other person is saying, you got to do something about that. And what are you going to do in those situations? And so, like, even where the struggle seems like too much and you're losing money or you're understanding none of what they're saying, you can still do the rule building thing and come up with strategies. And, like, that's something we could guide them through, I guess, is strategies for how to deal when they feel like they can't deal, I guess. Maybe. Okay, so
Go ahead.
by all means, Chris. I was going to switch gears.
Yeah, well, I was pulling up the Kindle screen because it's been almost a month now since we read this book and talked about this book, so I was pulling up do I have my screen share going there? Share, okay, there it is. So, learning is misunderstood, to learn, retrieve. Yeah, see, I was affirmed in all of those. It's the embrace difficulties that we were just talking about there. And then 5, avoid illusions of knowing, which I really, we encounter that. In fact, I've got a student who's doing some remediation this summer, and that was the most frustrating thing for her. And I think a lot of our students are frustrated with it because they think they've got it. They've spent the time. But then when it comes down to engage in the task, they find themselves really lost. And I think there was a quote from the book, those that are least competent are sometimes the one that, and I'm paraphrasing here, that most often overinflate their abilities. So.
Absolutely, and that was really intriguing to me because I have seen that so many times, and I've seen that not just with students, but like with colleagues who are like, "Yeah, I'm a great teacher," and it's just like, "Oh, yeah, okay," and like they feel like they're meeting standards that they don't understand,
Right.
And the same happens with our students, and so I was reading that part like, all right, so how do we get them to understand so that they can improve? And for me, it was a lot of referring to simple rubrics like Apple rubrics or referring to actual can-dos so that they're like over and over seeing it and applying it and looking at themselves, looking at models and measuring it. Like I feel like we have to do that, especially with proficiency-based, so they know what proficiency is and they return to it and they self-reflect to see what the next step is. Do you guys do anything with that to help people see where they actually are so they can improve to help students or colleagues?
I just had a thought that I might try to do is take what ACTFL has for descriptors for like listening. I'm thinking if I were teaching my Spanish 4 class and I want them at intermediate mid, maybe or intermediate low, I would get the descriptor for novice high, intermediate low, and intermediate mid for listening, for example, and just have that on one page for them to look at and go through what it might be. And then when we every time we do a listening exercise, they could go through and just check and see where they thought they were for that particular thing. It might also help me focus the task that I'm asking them to do with that activity, and maybe do the same thing for the reading and the writing and the speaking.
Do you think that would help you with the grading too, if they are self-reflecting like that, so that you also could look at how they evaluated themselves and use that for your own things? Like I'm thinking in terms of mine, like I have to have test, quiz, and homework because that's what my district mandates. So like I give them a test grade for that, but like if the kids give themselves a test grade first.
Yeah, I think that'd be a lot easier. It'd be a lot less time spent looking for certain things. Like if they assess themselves, we have a language lab. They could go into the language lab and I can download their MP3 file of their conversation and then I can upload it again so it's a task for them to listen to we could send them all into the lab and they can listen to their own conversations and kind of assess themselves that way. Usually, a lot of times it's the girls that underscore themselves and the boys overscore themselves in general. But I think it would kind of give me a better target to what to look for. If they said, I did really well at this and I'm proud of, I think it's always important to say, like, what is something that you're proud of that you've done during this particular thing, so that you can know, you know where to say, instead of just good job, like, you know what, you really did do a great job adding some connector words in there, or using transitions, or I love it when they ask a question and the kid doesn't know what they're asking and they kind of rephrase it, or they give an example like, well, I like apples, or whatever it was. That's my favorite thing. And then I would have more specific feedback for them too.
And that was one of the things they emphasized in the Avoid Illusions of Knowing, was the people who reflect on what they're doing. And there were three things, and I'm trying to find it in my little notes, and I'm not finding it. Do you guys remember there were like 3 steps of the reflective process that people should do to avoid the illusions of knowing?
What chapter was that?
I think it was chapter 5.
Yes.
The only one with a library book.
Might be. I had a Barnes & Noble gift card, and I tried to use that. But I'm not finding it. But like, but the people who, there were 3 things that they did.
They connect their learning to other things. I've taken more notes almost than there is text.
I can't find it. But there were 3 steps of the process, and it reminded me also of like what we do in my blog. They were like, okay, what happened? Why did it happen? And what am I going to do about it? I guess is basically what it amounted to. And so, like, if they're listening to their conversations, then they're gonna have to stop and think, okay, where is it on there? Why is it on there? And then what would I do next? And I think if they're constructing that knowledge, that would be more valuable, because like I've been copying and pasting the Apple. This is what you do to get higher things. But if they're thinking about what they do next, how much more fruitful is that going to be?
That was on page 222. It's what did I do, how did it work, and how could I do it better next time?
Yes, exactly. And so if we built that into the process, like, so if we're not, like grading every single thing, like how many times did you say can or whatever in the conversation, or key, then and like they grade themselves on a rubric, a performance-based or proficiency-based rubric, and then say, what did I do, how'd it go, and what was it again, Sarah? What were the 3 things?
What did I do, how did it work, and how could I do better next time?
Yeah. I mean, if they just
what did I do,
those,
how did it work, how can I do?
If they just did those 3 things each time we had like a major assessment, like an IPA kind of thing, or a higher stakes conversation, I mean, that would boost them a bunch, don't you think?
I think so.
I think so. Or have peers assess too.
I don't know, because that's one thing that struck me about that, is that like that it emphasized that the teachers are the ones who know what's going on, and they don't know enough to know what they don't know.
Right.
So
I think there was a fine line. One of my takeaways from the book that's going to change my practice is that peer editing is not nearly as good as self-editing. So that, those 3 questions there, what did you do, how did it go, and what am I going to do next, is way more valuable for the learner. And getting them in the habit of always asking those questions to become really good learners is way better than having their classmate tell them, here's what you did, here's how it went, and here's what you can do next time. That's one of the things that I took from the book. And maybe ultimately having them do that for themselves is more important than having me do that. I'm there to help them see what they did, how it went, but ultimately, if we're building lifelong learners, they shouldn't need teachers. So rendering ourselves useless in that task of learning is maybe our big overarching goal. So learning French is a vehicle for learning to look at any situation and go, okay, what did I do? How did it go? And what am I going to do differently next time? That's making any learning stick, not just the languages we're teaching.
And that is beautiful, because I feel like,
Something
I
that
mean,
I did.
go ahead, Sarah.
I'm on a lag.
Oh,
I can see things after. Um, that's okay. Something I did this year was for the kids when they were doing presentations, if they had like a keynote or something like that to go along with something that they did in the lower levels, I did groups of like 5 or 6, and they would present to the group of 5 or 6, and then each person would fill out a little form, just like what was something that it seemed like you spent a lot of time on this, or you did a good job on this, or things like that. Maybe you could have spent more time on something. And then they would collect all of those, read them, and then do their reflection, so they could kind of, maybe if they felt like they did a crappy job at everything, hearing something nice from the kids in their group, they might be able to reflect a little more specifically, like, no, I did okay on that. And I kind of had them read that and then reflect and hand that in before I graded them.
so what kind of assignments were you doing this with? Was it like projects kind of things, or was it the conversations?
No, it was that was a childhood one. They were reporting out on the childhood of a famous Spanish speaker. So they had to talk about I think they had to have like 6 slides, and they had to talk about their things that they liked to do, what they used to do, one event that may have affected their lives. And so they'd go through the slides and say and talk about the things to the people in their group. And that was kind of to get them warmed up for when they would talk about their own childhood.
Right. So a presentation type thing. I really like the reflective piece there, that it makes them think about what they spent their time on. And that's a really powerful piece of like what is working for me, what is not. So I think that I don't know that that would be anywhere in the book, but I like it. I don't want to steal it. So uh, and that brings me to the last thing that I wanted to ask you guys about before we maybe touch on some of the things from the Lang book that we didn't get last time. But so what does this mean for your practice? Like, what are some steps that you're going to take after you have read or started or watched this video about Make It Stick?
Well, I think I see a real opportunity here to make this part of that 10% in English. You know, have those meta chats in class where we're talking about learning. I think it's a lot of it is valuable enough that it would justify, you know, using some of that 10%. The English, especially at the beginning of the year, starting to get them into good habits. I was going to ask you all, how much of this do you think your students, or maybe I should ask, how much of this, of what we've read in Make It Stick, do you think is part of the discussion about learning in your own districts? It's a lot of it's new. I really don't feel that it's out there and being talked about a lot, or being imparted to the kids, shared with the kids, so that they could put it into practice themselves. What do you think?
I am really lucky at an independent school because we do this kind of discussion and talking about, as faculty, and then we really take that to the kids a lot. So I'm probably not representative of what's going on out there.
I think it's interesting.
As far as what was covered in the book, sorry. As far as what was covered in the book, I don't feel like my district is really focusing in on this. They're really working hard to do the proficiency-based learning. We have a mandate from the state that in 2017 graduates, I think, have to have a proficiency-based diploma. So they're really working hard to get that into place. But there hasn't been as much talk about learning, and it's just kind of, we're switching over to learning and not teaching, like using the word learning and saying that the kids need to learn it instead of we're teaching it, because if we're teaching it, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're learning it. But as far as like the different ideas in here, I haven't really heard much about it in my district.
I feel like we're in a cover kind of situation in a lot of my district, and I'm the department in my school, and I don't get a lot of contact with the other language teachers in the district. But I feel like everybody feels like they have to cover certain topics, certain contents, no matter what their subject area is. And so, like, as long as they have put it out there, then they are covered, so to speak. And so it's not been a question of is it sticking. It's been a question of did I cover what I had to? Did I like meet the requirements? Did we actually get to that era, or do we actually cover that theorem or whatever it is? And so I feel like this would be a very valuable conversation, but I feel like the kind of tests that we have in place are impeding that conversation. That they're more focused on breadth rather than depth, and it's really crippling a lot of my colleagues. Because I mean, I don't have a test, so I don't let it cripple me. But a lot of my colleagues do, and they're not. They don't really. They're not encouraged to make it stick, I think.
Something Douglas was talking about a second ago really struck a chord with me. I'm thinking of that, using the 10%, the meta talks. I'm thinking of all the opportunities we have with students that struggle, that come in for extra help, or they need guidance. They need something to help them make it stick, and I'm wondering if it would spiral. If those of us who are reading research like this, if we share this learning, this research, this ways to learn better with them, will they see that transfer over? Because they're probably struggling in not just world language. These students are probably struggling with across the board. And if they see these things work, if we're the ones that have those conversations with them, it's going to spread, hopefully.
I agree with you, Chris, and I think that anything we can do as language teachers to increase our relevance and our presence in the buildings where we teach is good. Good for us individually, but good for us as a profession of language teachers. I guess what I come away with reading this book, listening to this book, I guess, is I want to go out there and explore and see how much of this really is filtering down to the students. Because, and going back to your point, Laura, if teachers are feeling a lot of pressure to cover a lot of material and meet whatever the criteria are for their evaluations, it seems like there are lots of lessons in here, things that would help their students get there and make them look better. If the test scores are better, the teachers are better, they're happier, administrators are happier, and that's what this is all about. I mean, so much of it is fact-based memorization and learning. I mean, this is still the backbone of a lot of testing that we see in this country, and I would think that it would be in our interest, or in the interest of these teachers who feel all that pressure, to share these learning techniques so the kids can do better on tests. I mean, that's what this is all about.
Yeah, because I've been in the position where I thought, like, oh, sorry.
No, you can go ahead.
I've been in the position where I thought that I had to, like, get through, my Sarah or Star PowerPoint or whatever, and, like, then Sarah Star is done. And I've done that, and like the parents wanted me to like give them notes or to like get through that section of the book, and then if I didn't provide them notes that they could copy, if they couldn't copy them, if they didn't have time to copy them word for word, then they felt like all in a tizzy. But if we disseminate this research more about like if you do it word for word, it's not going to stick as well as if you pick out the salient points. If we make sure they understand what they should be, how they should be taking notes, and like how they should be processing information. If we understand how they should be processing information, I think everybody will feel more successful. But everybody has to get away from that. I have to have everything written down word for word, and I have to read it a million times, and then not studying. So how would we disseminate this approach, the making it stick approach, to studying?
At my school, we have a time during the day.
Go. Your turn.
I'm lagging.
No, your turn. Go.
There's a time during the day that we call team time, It's 10 minutes every day that we meet with 10 or 12 kids that are in a certain grade, and we keep them every year. So it's kind of, if we used it appropriately, I think it would work a lot better, but a lot of times the kid just skips the team time. But I think that would be a good place to start. Like if we could focus it and get it, instead of just picking out schedules or talking about our summers and playing games, if we could actually use that time to talk about a topic a week or something like that, I think that would be helpful, because then it's not taking time out of anybody's class time. It's not taking time out of math or English or foreign language.
Yeah, and a school-wide initiative. You know, if you could get some cohort teachers on board, I mean, that's what we did this past year at my school. All the faculty had read Dweck's Mindset, and then it really filtered in. I mean, all the discussions at faculty meetings, and it just informed our practice. And the kids were probably sick of hearing us talk about it, but at the end of the day, you know that hopefully they understand, oh, okay, you know, and that's why a lot of the themes in Make It Stick really resonated with me, because I was just coming off of the mindset, you know, and the getting up and the resilience from falling down, and how that was part of the learning process.
I think too that one of the most powerful ways we can bring this into our school community is to get some kids to really try it, to test it out themselves, and to be you know, spokespeople for it. That, you know, I did this, I changed the way I study, and it really created some great results, because the authors say over and over that this is, it's a little counterintuitive. It requires more work on the part of the learner to, instead of just rereading where the text is immediately accessible, that you have to constantly retrieve and retrieve and retrieve and quiz yourself, and that does require more work. But I think if we had some students that would be willing to kind of test drive some of the techniques, and could come back and report on that, that could be pretty powerful for, you know, spreading among other students.
The whole process makes me think of a couple of students in particular who just are really anxious, and like they feel like they have to have everything perfect down, and they have to, like, and I think of them like trying to furiously copy notes or whatever, and they're like, I don't know what I'm supposed to know. And we had a lot of conversations like that in our equivalent of team time. Like we have focus Fridays, and like they were so anxious. So like if they were, instead of pulling them aside to just like vent their frustrations, if we could have like tutoring time where it was strategy time rather than like, here's what you need to know, because a lot of the subjects are like I can think of, they were frustrated with history, and they said it's so much, but if they were sitting down with history teachers talking about how to pick out the good things and how to like narrow it down and how to quiz themselves and what to quiz themselves on, that would probably be more fruitful than just, you know, trying to just read the dates over and over, I guess.
Right, and Laura, you're talking about, you know, how do you quiz each other? How do you quiz yourself in this material? I remember, I think it was in Chapter 8, the college professor, they took a lot of examples of what she was doing with her students, and one of them was simply renaming the study groups, her student study groups, as testing groups. That's because that's really the emphasis. That should be how they're spending their time when they're getting together, testing each other, not just studying, retrieving.
One of the points I wanted to bring up, following what you said earlier, Douglas, about how language teachers, world language teachers, can be instrumental. One of the advantages I think we have is that we talk about acquisition, and I think for a lot of students, what they're required to do in our classroom is unlike what they have typically done in school, save for math. And I have a lot of conversations. I've got a colleague, a math teaching colleague of mine, and he and I sometimes sort of bemoan the fact that kids don't retain things. And I think those that are successful in math and successful in world language, they're the ones that have tapped into the research that's in this book, because they don't need you to remind them every day what a verb conjugation is or what 2 + 7 equals. They've acquired it. So they're ready to move on to the next challenge. And a lot of our students that struggle, probably both with math and world language, they're the ones that want to learn it, not acquire it. So they're not holding it long term. It hasn't stuck. they still have to go back and review. And I think that's the advantage we have at bringing this research to all disciplines, is if you'll study things the way you've acquired French or Spanish, then you will know them so much better, whether it's facts or not. Because, I mean, you're right. This is a lot of memorization. But there's a certain point when there's no effort involved anymore. You just know it.
Well, and most of our memorization was not word by word, piece by piece. It was
Right.
in context, and it was because we needed it. Because, like, I always come back to the furniture quiz that I aced in college, and then when it was moving time with, you know, my Mexican ex-husband, like, it was like, well, what? Give me the mueble, whatever that is. Like, I couldn't think of the words. I could only think of the word for furniture because I didn't retain it. So, like, if you're using it, if you're providing a scenario and like an actual problem that you have to do for the test, then then that we have to rethink testing and quizzing and what that means in the context of our languages too, so that like it's not just a question of 2 plus 2 or how do you conjugate this. It's like how do you get to McDonald's or whatever, that like
Right.
they're actually applying it. And like you were talking about in our previous LangCamp Hangout this week, Chris, with the like talking about themselves to apply the concept and doing something like that. Like if we have to rethink testing too to get them to use it and not just memorize it, to apply as well. Is that what you were getting at too?
Mm-hmm.
The book reminded me a lot of a website that I've used in the past called wordplay.com. Have you heard of that?
I don't think so.
It's like Conjugamos, but it actually, Conjugamos is just random. It gives you the words, and sometimes you can get through it and actually not ever get to tener if tener is in your word list. But wordplay.com
Just
it's like
Spanish.
flashcards that come up. But there's 3. Oh, that's right. It's just for Spanish. I forgot. But so, Laura. But it comes up, and so at first it's just matching. This is falling down, so it's to eat, and you have to click comer. And then when you get all of those right, you go to the next level, and it's typing the English or typing the Spanish, and then there's another level. But it knows what you've learned, and it won't give you that same one again if you've proven that you know that one. So it's kind of like the 3 boxes, the Lettner boxes, where you put it, I do know, I'm not sure, and I don't know it all. And then at the end, every time you log in, it'll tell you have a certain number of words that you need to review. And then you have a little battery thing next to that particular lesson. And after you've gone through it once, it goes up like to here. And then if it goes up again, it tells you like when you're done with the initial phase, it gets up all the green. But then after you've actually retained it and done it again later, then it'll be blue. And the teacher can look in and see who's been studying what and how long you've been studying it.
Is it kind of like Duolingo? Because like after you've used the word or the phrase so many times, then it says you're good, you're proficient at it, you can move on to the next thing. But then since I haven't looked at my Portuguese Duolingo in a couple months, like everything has gone back down, and so I kind of have left myself, I guess. So I would have to go back and do those things to get those back up. So yeah, so it can be kind of mechanized like that too. So there are some things out there that we can do to build in that, and if they've got the sense context in there. Another thing it reminded me of is lyrics training, which my French friends you can use also, because and I was thinking that maybe the big application would be actually being able to sing the song in lyrics training, where like they have the little blanks that you have to fill in, and that's one of the strategies they specifically talked about was having like leaving blanks in the reading or like leaving letters out, and so that made me think of that too. Like there are things available for us to make quizzing readily available for the students who don't know how to quiz themselves, maybe.
You know, it would be interesting too with Duolingo. I'm not as familiar with Conjugamos, but I use Duolingo, and I'm thinking about using it as homework this year in class. But to maybe, I don't know what the right order would be, but to talk about some of these ideas to make it stick with the students in those early weeks of school, then have them go explore Duolingo, use it, and see which of those principles we've talked about, which of those different methods they see in being employed in Duolingo, or maybe the other way around, that they go and just start using Duolingo and report back, and what are some of the things that you notice about how this site operates. So I don't know which one would be the best use of generation and some of these other concepts, but something like that. Maybe you've got your own thoughts on how to do that.
I've been talking about doing homework choices more strategically this semester, this year. Like in the past, it was just like I gave them like 80 choices of like what they want to do, and they just pick the easiest one to get over with, one they could do fastest, and that has not been improving them at all. Like the ones who turn it in, it hasn't really helped them move up. So I would talk about like connecting it to their assessments. And then, so like, all right, which one of these do you need? So then if they had the additional step of like, all right, now what study strategies is helping you do, and did it work? Like, what have you done? How well did you do it? And what do you need to do next? Well, I mean, oh my gosh. It'd be disappointing if that didn't work, but it seems like it should.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good.
Can you guys think of any other strategies or any other final questions? We only have about 5 minutes left.
Oh, wow.
Laura, are you able to see, are people who are viewing able to post questions, and do you see those? I mean, is that how these have been working this summer?
We have a little Q&A button, but I haven't had any questions today.
Okay.
So I think most people are just kind of absorbing.
I think a lot of people just didn't have a chance to read it. It looked like there were a few comments.
Yeah, most people said they just wanted to watch and kind of observe until they had finished it. So, but no, nobody's posted any Q&A questions. No, you can if you want to now.
Well, it's a great book. I mean, anyone who's out there who's listening to this, I think it's really worth your time. Again, I mentioned at the beginning, the way that I've been processing it all is through Audible, listening to the audiobook, and just little bits, because that reinforces some of what they're saying here. As you're listening, you have to kind of go back and retrieve the information that you've already heard earlier and try to fit that together if you're only listening 15, 20 minutes at a time. Anyway, it's a great book, and it's I think you all would probably agree that it's been worth your time. Would you?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, and in fact, I've got several of my colleagues that I've turned on to this book. I wish I had known about it before school was out, because we all do summer reading, and this wasn't on our choice list, but I'm thinking it might be the next time around.
Yeah, I got excited about it from Lang chat with like his reading. Costa Rica, go.
Oh, sorry. I like how it was easy for me to connect it to the other book I read by Alan November, the Who Owns the Learning, just the student tutorial part and the elaboration. Alan November calls it the student tutorial, but Make It Stick, it was elaboration and just using your own words to repeat something back instead of memorizing. I think that if I can get it together and do the student tutorials, have them making their own, teaching their peers how to do something, then I think that kind of reinforce that I need to do it.
And I know that's one thing that the English teacher who does Intro to Digital Publications or Intro to Publications does. She has kids make instructional videos on how to work through math problems so that like they can do something fancy with that as well. But I mean, if you can explain it, then you can do it. So, but I think for us, it would not so much be explaining conjugation, for example. It would be like having a conversation. It would be actually producing the language, or making sense of a training schedule. I don't know. So.
One final thought. I find it intriguing that the book used the word fluency, which for us means one thing, but they were saying that oftentimes students confuse fluency with understanding, and I think that is key to us. If you're just repeating back what the teacher said, or you're just copying the same word or the same sentence down, it has the illusion of mastery, but it's not mastery. It's fluency, at least by their definition of fluency. You can do it quickly, but it doesn't mean that you'll know it 2 weeks from now or 2 years from now, and that's really what we're trying to get them. We want them to come back 5 years and still be speaking French or Spanish to us. That's our version of fluency.
Like, you can repeat the word, but can you actually answer a question accurately with the word?
Right.
Yeah. Can you apply it? And it comes back to that form of assessment.
Does the word for couch come back to you, or do you have to say mueble, mueble?
Oh, it was torture. I still use mueble for everything, and my husband doesn't speak Spanish now. So now
Una
we call
cosa que, una cosa que.
la chose, la. Oh my goodness. Okay. All right. So
That would be
that's
a good
about
task. You're moving. Tell the movers where to put what.
it. Have them rearrange my classroom and be like, all right, la silla allá. Oh yes. Oh, okay. Yes, this has potential. Okay. Well, it is about that time. So, any final takeaways or thoughts before we go? No, Chris snuck one in.
Buy it, listen to it, read it. Good book. It's a lot of good thinking out there right now and learning. You just got to go out and find it, and try to apply it. I think we can do a good job of spreading the word in our buildings if we know how these things are supposed to work.
And one thing I would say is keep a proficiency focus when you're doing it. Don't let yourself drift back into vocab grammar stuff as you're thinking about what they're talking about. Think about what it means for proficiency, for communication, really.
Right.
That's right. We have to be creative about how we're applying some of these things. You don't want to just get back to flashcards and lists. That's absolutely right.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining me, folks. And this is it for LangCamp for this year. If you guys have some ideas for next year, feel free to post. The wiki's available, or Google Community's available, and these will all be up on the wiki for you guys to enjoy at your leisure. So thanks again for joining, and we will see you at LangChat in a couple weeks.
Thank you,
Peace.
Laura.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.